Survivors of attempted murder. What's your story? Story 1. I had a cousin, adopted by my aunt and uncle from a difficult background, who once chased me around his house with a kitchen knife, threatening to harm me. His father managed to tackle and restrain him. I was about 12 or 13 years old at the time, and he was around 16. I vividly remember the panic and fear I felt while my aunt drove me home. Later that year, he was involved in a tragic incident where an 8-year-old lost their life. Consumed by guilt, he eventually confessed and was sentenced to prison. This year, he was released and sent me a friend request on social media. Needless to say, I declined. Story 2. Years ago, I shared a duplex with a coworker. At the time, our workplace hired a new employee named Sean, who had been struggling but seemed determined to turn his life around. Sean had a history of substance abuse and had been living in his brother's garage while working hard to save up for his own place. When winter came, Sean's living situation became unbearable due to the lack of heating. After discussing it, my roommate and I decided to let him stay on our couch under the condition that he remained clean and continued saving for a new home. He accepted, and things went smoothly for several months. Unfortunately, Sean started missing work, disappearing for days and becoming increasingly aggressive. The situation escalated when my roommate found him using illegal substances in our living room. At that point, we asked Sean to leave. A few weeks later, around 1 a.m., I was awakened by loud pounding on the front door. When I answered, I found Sean, clearly under the influence and yelling. I quickly latched the wooden screen door and tried to calm him down. However, when I mentioned calling the police, he smashed through the door, knocking me backward onto the couch. Before I could react, Sean was on top of me, his hands around my throat. I tried fighting back, but he was too strong, and I started losing consciousness. Just as I thought it was over, the weight on me suddenly disappeared. Gasping for air, I looked up to see my roommate hitting Sean with a frying pan. She had heard the noise, grabbed the pan from the kitchen, and intervened just in time. Together, we managed to push Sean outside, where he sat crying on the porch until the authorities arrived. Story 3. During my first semester of college, I returned to the dorms late one night after tailgating and partying all day. I found some friends celebrating a birthday with mushrooms and weed. While we were hanging out, there was a loud knock at the door that sent everyone into a panic. Being the most sober one there, I went to check. It was another guy from our hall, visibly upset and accusing people of stealing his weed. Everyone in the room was freaking out, so I stepped into the hall with him to de-escalate the situation. His anger boiled down to about $30 worth of missing weed. Things got tense when he got in my face. I pushed him against the wall and told him it was over, but he shoved my arm off and made a quick motion. Thinking he had swung at me, I tried to punch back but ended up on the ground. That's when I noticed blood everywhere. I realized he had slashed my throat and cheek with a hunting knife he had hidden under his sweatshirt. I clutched my neck, unable to speak or move much as he ran off. I managed to kick the door of a nearby dorm room, and someone came out, screamed, and got others to help. People used t-shirts to press against my neck and called 911. Blood was everywhere, on the walls, the floor, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. 911 initially thought it was a prank call and wouldn't send an ambulance until they spoke to an RA. Unfortunately, the RA on duty, who had been drinking and supplying alcohol, dismissed the situation. Eventually, another RA stepped in, and help was finally on the way. I thought I was going to die and tried to convey final messages for my family to those around me. When the ambulance arrived, the EMTs prepared the defibrillator and told me to stay awake. One of them reminded me that I wouldn't want my family to bury me. Something inside me clicked, and I fought to stay conscious. At the hospital, I received a blood transfusion and woke up with 44 stitches across my throat and 10 on my cheek. The doctors told me I had lost over a third of my blood, narrowly missing a fatal injury to my carotid artery. My family and friends were there, having rushed to the hospital in the early hours of the morning. Despite the ordeal, I refused to let it derail my education. I took my exams the following week, scars and all, and passed. Over the next 4 years, I dealt with the legal aftermath, including a lengthy trial and PTSD. Eventually, the attacker pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, serving a few years in prison. The experience profoundly changed me. It taught me not to take life for granted and gave me the courage to pursue my dreams. After graduating with a double major, I sold my belongings and moved to Europe, teaching English and traveling across continents. I've since built a successful career and a fulfilling life. Now, 10 years later, I no longer dwell on the trauma. Instead, I celebrate each December 3rd as a reminder of my survival and how far I've come. The scars remain, but so does the determination to live life fully and without regrets. Story 4. Not really sure if it's attempted murder, but someone in the Bahamas mugged me and then tried to stab me after I handed over my wallet and phone. I swatted at his hand with the goodie bag I had from the party and ran as fast as I could while he tried to pull the knife out. I assume it must have gotten stuck on the stuff inside. Anyways, in my terror, I leapt down a block of stairs I really didn't think I'd clear. Seconds later, I heard skidding shoes on concrete, a swear and a crack. I looked over my shoulder and saw the guy sprawled on the ground, probably unconscious. I let out a nervous laugh and kept running until I found a place with a phone and called the police. They showed up like half an hour later, found the guy still unconscious with a small pool of blood around his head, and couldn't stop laughing at his incompetence. I kind of joined in, but it hit me that it could have been me lying there, stabbed. Eventually, I got my wallet and phone back, though the cash was gone. The Bahamas, man. Story 5. When I was a kid, my neighbors were this sweet old couple, and occasionally their grandkids, 5 boys, would come to visit. The oldest, Liam, was my age and had severe behavioral problems. All his younger brothers were terrified of him, and I hated his guts, but I still had to hang out with him. One time, we were playing in an inflatable pool in my backyard. Liam, my sister, and I being the oldest ones there. No adults were around. Well, Liam wouldn't stop picking on his poor brothers, so I pantsed him. Everyone laughed. He did not take it well. When I turned around, he ran up behind me, shoved my head underwater, and held me under for about 2 minutes while I struggled. I could see his brothers' legs around me, but none of them moved, and that's how petrified they were of him. I thought it was over. I was starting to black out when I began to hear a swoosh, swoosh, swoosh noise, and then suddenly I was free, flat on my back, coughing up water. My sister had waded over as fast as she could and punched him in the face so hard she broke his nose. Story 6. Back in May 2006, I got off work at the mall. I got on the bus as usual, and another mall employee I had talked to on a regular basis sat down across from me. We chatted for a while, and he commented about always running into people who knew me. There was another person I knew as an acquaintance on the bus, so we moved back to talk to her as well. The first guy got off, and she and I kept talking. She said she had to walk to meet her boyfriend before we got off, and I offered to walk with her until she met him, but she declined, and we went our separate ways. I went to the store before heading home and grabbed some beer. Halfway through my first beer, there was a knock at the door. A friend of my roommate came over. We talked for a bit, and then he left. Almost done with my beer, there was another knock. It was him again, asking if he could use the restroom. Thinking nothing of it, I said sure, but as soon as the door was open the rest of the way, 3 more people came in. One of them was the boyfriend of the girl on the bus. The first thing said was, "Why were you messing with my girl, dog?" 2 of them opened butterfly knives, and I tried to talk them down. I sat there calmly on the couch. They were quite unwilling to listen, and I think sitting there calm and just trying to talk pissed off at least one of them. The boyfriend was in my face waving his knife, but he didn't make the first strike. His friend jumped out from behind me and stabbed me in the neck. It felt like it went in one side and out the other. I stood up, grabbed my throat, and said, F***, I'm going to die. I ran to my bedroom to get away through the patio door in there. I closed one door behind me and was going for the sliding glass door when there was a crash and a slam against the back of my head. They had kicked the door off its hinges, and it hit me. The next thing I remember, I swear I was in my living room again, but it may have been me stumbling into the hallway. I saw 2 flashes reflected off the man's glasses. There was an ambient light coming from outside, but for a moment, there were just those 3 flashes. I was suddenly on the floor looking up at the front door, one figure standing there. I told him, "Just leave, I'm already dead." The voice was raspy and gurgling. He then asked where my phone was, and I said I thought it was in my bag. After he grabbed it and was out the door, I heard a car squeal out of the parking lot, leaving me for dead. I picked myself up off the floor, stumbled out the door, and started knocking at my neighbor's window and door for help. They looked out, and right after, the man came out with a towel, telling his family to call 911. I have no idea how long it took, but emergency services showed up and began asking me questions. Who, why, the usual. I was scared to talk because I thought every time I did, even more blood poured out than if I were silent. The paramedics arrived to take me away, and I tried to persuade them not to cut off my clothes because I wasn't wearing underwear. My thought now is that it was delirium. I was trying to maintain some modesty, I guess. They asked me questions as they got me ready, on the stretcher, and during the ride to the nearest trauma ward in a city nearby. We got there, and as they wheeled me into the ER, I got another scare as one doctor said, "He's probably a junkie that got messed up in a drug deal gone wrong." Just before I passed out, I felt an intense pressure around my neck. That is the story of that evening. 2 blackouts, stabbed 7 times, 4 of them in the neck, and shot 4 times. I have a bullet in my head, 1 in my chest, 1 that shattered in my hand, and 1 that was removed from my esophagus. I was out of the hospital in 11 days. Story 7. Driving through rural Oregon with friends during spring break, we got stuck behind a slow-moving car on a single-lane highway. When a passing zone came up, I tried to overtake her, but she sped up. I slowed down to fall back behind her, but she slowed down too, refusing to let me in. The passing lane was about to end, and I was stuck in the oncoming lane with a semi-truck heading straight for me. The woman just smiled at me as she blocked me out. I swerved onto the shoulder, missing the semi by only a few feet. The drivers behind her let me back in, and shortly afterward, she exited the highway. Now I only drive fast cars and make sure to overtake quickly before anyone can react. Story 8. I delivered a pizza to a house just outside of the city. On the way back, I stopped to help a car that had pulled over in front of me with their hazard lights on. I pulled up beside them and thought it was weird that nobody rolled down a window or made any kind of contact with me for around 15 seconds. Then the passenger jumped out of the car, yelling that they needed help, and started walking toward my car. Something felt off. As I started to pull away before he could reach my passenger door, he began shooting at me. I ducked my head after the first shot went through the back window and embedded itself in my passenger seat headrest. Another shot came through the rear window, while 3 others only hit the outside metal parts of my car. He missed entirely with the final shot. It turned out to be a robbery plot. They had ordered the pizza and stationed themselves down the road to intercept me. They knew who I was and that I could recognize them, as I had delivered to them a few times before. The guy wasn't wearing anything to cover his face, which made me think he would have killed me if he had made it inside my car. By the next morning, they had arrested all of them. The shooter was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. However, he later appealed the sentence due to a wording error in the jury instructions, won the appeal, and was resentenced to 10 years. He was released in November 2010 after serving just 5 years. He was arrested twice for parole violations during the last months of his probation. I laughed. Story 9. My older brother abused me for most of my life. Broken bones, chemical burns from supergluing my eyes shut while I was sleeping, regular burns, strangling, and more. The incident that stands out the most was when we were about 13 and 15. He got angry because I was watching a show and didn't want to give up the TV for him. He started punching me wherever he could. I ran into our room, but he slammed into the door until it cracked open. He chased me through the house, grabbed me by the hair, and threw me over the banister. I fell an entire story to the floor below. When I stood up, he was at the top of the stairs with a chef's knife in his hand. Panicked, I tried to escape through the French doors in my sister's room, but he made it outside just as I opened them. So I ran back upstairs with him right behind me, making it to the kitchen. We had one of those wraparound counters with an island, and it was the only thing separating us. I tried calling my mom, but he sliced the phone cord with the knife. I threw the receiver at his face as hard as I could and ran past him while he was holding his head. I made it down the street before realizing he wasn't following me anymore. When I threw the phone, I shattered his front teeth. Turns out, exposed nerves are excruciating. I called my mom and told her what happened. She told me to go back home and said she'd talk to him when she got home from work. Yeah, no thanks. I walked to my friend's house across the highway and stayed there until my dad dragged me back home. Story 10. I was riding my bike home one night and stopped at a light in the bike lane. Bam! A pickup truck hit me from behind. The driver had swerved into the bike lane while slowing for the light. Luckily, he wasn't going very fast, so it only knocked me over. I started yelling at him through his open window, but he pretended to ignore me. I leaned in to get his attention and he tried to punch me, but I pulled back. He then started to get out of the truck, presumably to fight me, but changed his mind. I decided to get his license plate number, so I walked into the crosswalk for a better look. When he saw me, he gunned the truck and swerved, trying to run me over before speeding through the red light. The cops found him near his home and arrested him for drunk driving and assault with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Story 11. A man attacked me on a beach in Barbados, attempting to assault me. When I fought back, he tried to kill me by strangling me. I dug my shoulders into the sand to relieve the pressure and avoid blacking out. Somehow I managed to wedge my knee between us, separating his torso from mine. He arched his back, bringing his face closer to mine, and I bit down hard, tearing into his mouth and tongue. He screamed and fled, leaving me alone on the beach. Afterward, I felt a strange sense of euphoria, but my boyfriend, who had been running down to help me, cried for hours. The real horror came later with the hospital visit and reporting the incident to the police. The Barbados police showed no concern for what had happened, and society there leaned heavily on victim blaming. Nothing was computerized, and I had to write 3 copies of my statement to get it officially reported. My only consolation is that tongues don't grow back, and that man will remember me forever. Story 12. When I turned 18, I went out with a couple of friends. We decided to walk to a local shop for some food before heading back to play video games at my friend's house. On the way back, we were walking along a familiar road, only a few minutes from his house. I offered to carry my friend's bag, which had several cans of spray paint, as he was complaining of back pain. Suddenly, I felt uneasy, and one of my friends shouted, "Run!" I looked back to see 2 men and a dog running toward us. Not my smartest move, but I began to run. I barely got a few steps before feeling a heavy blow to the back of my head. Something wooden, maybe a small bat or broken pool cue. I kept trying to move, even as one of the men repeatedly struck me. Meanwhile, the other man chased my friends, one of whom managed to get over a fence into safety. After several hits to my head and shoulders, I collapsed. The attacker kicked me a few times before running off after the dog. Adrenaline pumping, I got to my feet, thinking, where are my friends? I ran a few meters up the road and saw my best friend lying face down near the school's back gate. I froze when I realized the other attacker, face covered, was standing there staring at me coldly. He walked toward me, hitting me hard in the chest with what felt like a bottle, then grabbed me. He swung at my back, but he hit the spray paint cans in the bag I was carrying instead. I heard a hissing sound as paint started leaking. Suddenly, he took off with his friend and the dog. I turned to my friend on the ground, wheezing and gasping. Blood was pooling from his face and leaking onto the curb. Instinctively, I lifted his sweater and shirt and saw puncture wounds in his back. That's when I realized he'd been stabbed and needed immediate help. I rolled him into the recovery position and screamed for our other friend to call an ambulance. An off-duty firefighter walking by ran over and began first aid. He called a doctor he knew to assist while we waited for emergency services. As I stood there, I felt wetness on my chest. Taking off my sweater, I discovered a stab wound near my ribs, bleeding heavily. I used my shirt to wrap around the wound until paramedics arrived. Both my friend and I were taken to the hospital. My friend didn't survive. One of the knife wounds had severed his aorta, and he bled out internally. I was discharged the next morning after receiving stitches and began the long process of trying to recover mentally. Looking back, I've realized that if I hadn't carried my friend's bag, the attackers wouldn't have mistaken him for the one with valuables. He would have been wearing it instead, and the stab wounds that killed him would have been avoided. That thought has haunted me ever since. I lost my best friend that night, and it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Story 13. My older sister had issues. She still does, but now she lives 500 miles away and doesn't talk to me. When I was 11 and she was 13, we shared a room. She had already run away a few times by then and would often threaten to do it again to get things from our grandma. One night we went to bed. I was coming down with a head cold and was having nose problems. She kept yelling at me and throwing things because I was snoring. This happened a few times, and I kept telling her I couldn't stop snoring. She'd have to deal with it. At some point, I dozed off and woke up to her straddling my body, pinning my arms to my sides, with her hands around my throat. I started making as much noise as I could and managed to knock her off me. My mom walked in at that moment and yelled at me for making noise. I told her what happened. She sat down with my sister, calmly telling her that she couldn't do things like that, or she'd go to jail. Meanwhile, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, barely able to breathe without pain. When I started struggling more to breathe, my mom told me to stop being dramatic because my sister was already in trouble. Looking back, I think I was having my first anxiety attack. This wasn't the first or last time she tried to kill me. Story 14. I have a mate from the States, an older guy who owns a vending machine company. Things were going great with his business, which he co-owned with his childhood friend. But as it turns out, his friend was a jealous, greedy guy who wanted the company all to himself. One day, the friend called him up asking for help fixing his car. My mate, being the kind guy he is, showed up with his toolkit, ready to help. What he didn't know was that his friend had rigged the car to pump exhaust fumes into the cabin. Once my mate arrived, his friend knocked him out, threw him into the car, and left him there to suffocate while he went inside to watch TV. Luckily, my mate woke up, managed to escape, and went straight to the police. His friend eventually checked on the car, saw that he wasn't there, and texted him, "You should be asleep in the car." By then, he was already at the police station. What's crazier is that this wasn't the first suspicious incident. A month or two earlier, my mate was helping this guy mow his lawn when a freak accident caused a large piece of shrapnel to slice his cheek. Coincidence? Who knows? Needless to say, my mate now owns the entire company. He's a great guy, and this wasn't the first time someone tried to off him. Story 15. I dated the quarterback in high school. My parents hated him, and their hatred fueled me to overlook every red flag and try to make the relationship work, to prove them wrong. I was 17. By the time I was 19, I was still with him. Over the years, he'd pushed me around, left bruises, and done a lot of small abusive things, but I never told anyone. He always acted sorry and made it seem like everything was my fault. I was young and manipulated, and since he was my first, I felt trapped. I was in college, living alone and starting to experience life outside my small town. One day, after another bout of abuse, something snapped. I was done. It was late November, and he had just bought me a Christmas tree. When I called to break up with him, he got angry and demanded the tree back. Fine, I left it on my porch and went to a friend's house, feeling uneasy and wanting to avoid being home. He started calling and texting nonstop. At first, he begged me to talk, then he claimed his mother had a heart attack and needed my support. He timed his calls to match where he'd be if he were driving toward me, saying things like, "I'm not near you, I'm passing name of town." It felt calculated and manipulative. I turned off my phone and stayed at my friend's house until 3 a.m. When I got home, I carefully checked that his car wasn't nearby. I went inside and almost immediately my landline rang. "Where have you been?" His voice was cold. I told him not to call me and hung up. 2 seconds later, my door flew open and he grabbed me, slamming me against the counter. He screamed, demanding to know where I was and who I was with. I begged him to calm down, but he smashed my cell phone, ripped the landline out of the wall, and trashed my house. At one point, I managed to get outside, but neighbors who saw him drag me back inside by my hair did nothing. Inside, he grabbed a knife and held it to my neck, but said, "That's not how I want you to go." Then he shoved my face into the couch, suffocating me. As I started losing consciousness, he suddenly stopped, broke down crying, and begged me to forgive him. I lied, told him I forgave him, and convinced him to leave so I could rest. As soon as he left, I called 911. When he returned, banging on the door and crying, I told him the police were coming. He screamed, "UF asterisk B asterisk asterisk," and left. He later pled down to false imprisonment and got community service. I had a restraining order for a while, but the second it expired, he called, asking me to help get his record expunged. Needless to say, I told him to get lost. Story 16. My wife, a friend, and I went out to eat late one night. I borrowed my brother's black Cadillac Escalade, and we ended up caught in a mistaken identity gang-related drive-by shooting. Whoever they were after, they clearly wanted them dead. As we were driving, 2 guns came out of their car and they opened fire. I was shot 3 times, my wife was hit twice in the leg, but my friend sitting in the passenger seat wasn't hit at all. My wife was screaming hysterically, and my friend was yelling, "Oh, they're shooting at us!" I thought I was hearing rocks hitting the windows, but it was the bullets. We were close to home, so I floored it to get us there. Once we pulled into the driveway, I realized I had been shot when I reached for the door handle and saw blood pooling in the side pocket of the door. Despite this, I jumped out and ran to help my wife in the back. The cops arrived, and we were taken in 2 separate ambulances. That ride felt like the longest trip of our lives. Story 17. When I was 17, I took my high school girlfriend to a winter dance. Before the event, we went to dinner in the city, Dayton, OH, at a Thai restaurant. Since parking was tight, I had to park a bit farther away than usual, outside the nice district. It was snowing, and we were enjoying the walk when I noticed a man slightly alter his trajectory toward us. I've trained in Bujinkan Taijutsu since I was 14 and had situational awareness, but I let my guard down. As we passed him, a knife came out, a buck knife. He didn't ask for money, he told us to shut up and say nothing. He glanced at my date in a way that made it clear this wasn't about robbery. I had to decide, wait to see what he'd do or act. I chose to rush him. Despite having my hands up, he sliced the outside of my orbital socket. My date screamed and ran, calling for help. I pushed into his off swing, but he hit my ribs with the knife's handle. I couldn't breathe or see out of my right eye, but I managed to grab his neck, my thumb pressing on his trachea. I held his arm to keep the knife away and applied as much force as I could to his neck. There was a pop and he fell back. I stumbled away, too winded to go far, and collapsed about 50 feet away. I was bleeding heavily from my eye and thought it was gone. Police and my girlfriend found me on the sidewalk. Thankfully, I still have my eye, though I lost 50% of my vision. A long scar from my eyebrow to my cheek is a permanent reminder of that night. For about a week, her family was grateful I protected her. But a week later, she cheated on me with a basketball player and dumped me. Story 18. When I was 9 years old in the late 80s, I was walking around a small lake near our apartment. My mom worked a few streets away, so I thought it was safe to wander. I noticed a man in a truck following me. If I stopped, he'd stop, open his door, and pretend to read a newspaper. It freaked me out, but when I started walking toward another couple, he drove off. I didn't tell them what happened. I decided to head home, but as I crossed the street, the same truck came speeding toward me. Panicked, I changed directions and ran toward my mom's workplace. The truck followed me, driving on the wrong side of the road, inches away. I had 3 choices: stop and let him catch me, run straight into oncoming traffic on the main road, or somehow make it to my mom's work. I chose the road. I ran through traffic, narrowly avoiding cars, and made it to a gas station. Terrified, I tried asking the clerk for help, but I was crying too hard to talk. He pointed to the payphone, but I didn't have any money to make a call. I tried to use the phone book to find the police's number, but didn't know where to look. I finally called my mom's workplace collect, but no one answered. Eventually, I calmed down and made my way to her office. When I got there, her boss was present, so she got angry at me for being there and wouldn't let me explain. She told me to nap on the couch and not make noise. I fell asleep from exhaustion and never told her what happened. To this day, I don't know what that man's intentions were, but I'm grateful I'll never find out. I never went back to that lake or played outside alone until we moved a few months later. Story 19. My mom was severely ill and on heavy medications, which made her do a lot of terrible things. I was a quiet, shy, and introverted girl, but I often misbehaved by not doing exactly what she wanted. It was a typical abuse story, nothing out of the ordinary, until the day she tried to kill me. It was the first day of my summer vacation, and she didn't allow me to do anything at home. No TV, no going outside, no using the PC, not even leaving my room. Frustrated, I decided to get back at her by hiding the phone cable she used to talk to her friends all day. When she came home and realized the phone didn't work, she got much angrier than I expected. She started beating and kicking me, then slammed me onto the bed, pinning me down by my neck against the bed's edge. I saw pure hatred and anger in her eyes, like she wasn't even the mother who had raised me for 13 years. I realized she was going to kill me. In desperation, I kicked her as hard as I could and ran out of the house. I ended up in an orphanage for a while before being placed with a foster family. My mom eventually went through therapy and survived her illness, but we still don't get along. Story 20. When I was 16, a man began harassing students at my high school. It started with reports of him approaching kids as they walked home. We were told to be vigilant. One day I was walking home when he drove past and yelled something at me. I ignored it and kept walking. I turned onto my street, still far from home, when I saw his truck round the corner and stopped beside me. He yelled again and then ran out of the car toward me. I dropped my stuff and ran, screaming, but he was too fast. He caught me and dragged me into the back of his car. There was no way to open the door from the inside, and I was stuck yelling for him to let me go. He drove for 30 minutes before stopping in an industrial area. He duct taped my hands behind my back, pulled out a gun, and pointed it at my head. I heard a click, either the safety or a misfire, but I was sure I was going to die. Then I heard a helicopter overhead. Moments later, cop cars swarmed from every direction. The man bolted, leaving me in the car. An officer untied me, and I was safe. Turns out someone on my street had seen the abduction, called the police, and provided the truck's description and license plate. The man, a convicted predator on probation, climbed a smokestack and jumped to his death after 2 hours of police negotiations. While I'm grateful there was no court case and I got closure, the experience still haunts me. Story 21. When my job transferred me to a new location, I stayed with my cousin while I looked for a place. She had just broken up with her drug-addicted, violent boyfriend, but I didn't know that at the time. One night, after returning late from a softball game, I was unloading stuff from my car when her ex-boyfriend attacked me from behind and slit my throat. Blood poured everywhere, and I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. I realized I felt surprisingly okay, so I grabbed a bat from my trunk and found him trying to break into my cousin's house. I assumed he was going to kill her, so I beat him with the bat until I passed out. When I woke up, I realized I needed medical attention. Instead of calling 911, I drove myself to the hospital after cleaning up and changing into a turtleneck to hide the wound. I was completely out of it and not thinking straight. At the hospital, I received 88 stitches and was told I was no longer in danger. The ex-boyfriend, however, became a quadriplegic from the beating, Despite being charged with attempted murder, he avoided jail time because his wealthy family hired top lawyers. He had assumed I was her new boyfriend and was stalking her after their breakup. The legal battles drained my savings and left me in debt for years. He died about 10 years later, but I've always taken solace in the fact that despite everything, I could still scratch my balls and he couldn't. Story 22. When I was 18, I was kidnapped for the second time. It happened after a party around 1 a.m. on a Sunday. The streets were deserted, and in Caracas, Venezuela, that meant being hyper-aware of everything. My garage wasn't automatic, so I had to get out of my car to open it manually. As I got out, 2 kids jumped from my neighbor's yard. One had a gun tucked into his belt. I tried to get back into my car to escape, but then I heard a gunshot. I didn't feel anything at first, but I saw my bleeding hand and realized I'd been shot in the arm, just above the elbow. They forced their way into my car, one in the passenger seat, the other in the back, and I realized they were kidnapping me. In Venezuela, there are 2 types of kidnappings: express kidnappings, where they take you to the bank or demand a quick ransom, or prolonged abductions, where they take you out of the city for months while negotiating a ransom. They took me to an ATM to withdraw money, but daily limits prevented me from giving them much. The security guard at the bank saw my bloody shirt and did nothing, just hid. Afterward, they told me to drive toward the highway. It was 3 a.m. by then. They punched me, screamed insults, and one of them, who looked about 12 and was clearly on drugs, kept pointing the gun at my head. Eventually, we stopped near a cliff on the highway. They ordered me out of the car, stripped me naked, and told me to turn around. I closed my eyes and waited, sure they were going to kill me. I counted to 100, expecting it to end. When I turned around, they were gone. I walked 40 kilometers back to the city, naked, in the dark, and in pain from the bullet wound. Eventually, I reached a gas station where they called an ambulance. The worst night of my life was finally over. Story 23. I got involved with an American woman and went through the immigration process to live in Phoenix. Things were fine until she started using crack and meth. She blamed me for it and tried to get me addicted too. One night during one of her benders, I woke up to the sound of a metal baseball bat hitting my skull. She was swinging with all her strength. The first hit cracked my eye socket, the second split my scalp, and the third broke some teeth. Before she could swing a 4th time, I caught the bat and took it from her. The cops were called, but when they arrived, they arrested me instead, believing her claims of self-defense. I spent hours in holding, bleeding and barely conscious. They thought it was hilarious, a big guy getting attacked by his wife. It turned out she'd taken out multiple insurance policies in my name and wanted to cash them in to buy more drugs. I eventually got away from her in 2007 and started rebuilding my life, but I stayed married to her because I couldn't afford the legal fees to finalize the divorce. She's now in prison for 10 years, not for what she did to me, but for drug trafficking and identity theft. I don't hate her anymore. I hope she gets the help she needs and leaves me alone. Story 24. My dad was diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was 3 after a head injury triggered it. For most of my life, he was a bit different, but manageable. My mom always explained his illness to us, and we adjusted. When I was 16, his medication was changed, and it triggered a sharp decline. He started smelling things that weren't there and obsessively rinsing his mouth. Then he became paranoid and began accusing me of bizarre things, having a party, having inappropriate relationships, all completely untrue. One morning, as I walked across the living room to make breakfast, he said, "I have a right to live, even if that means you don't." His tone sent chills down my spine. I froze, trying to stay calm, and told him I needed to go to school. I ran to my brother's room, woke him up, and told him we were late. As I rushed us out of the house, I saw my dad standing in the living room with a shotgun. I shoved my brother out the door and into the car as my dad started shooting. Thankfully, a tree blocked his view, and we sped away. We drove to a grocery store where I broke down in shock. Someone in the area heard the gunshots and called the police, but they didn't respond for hours. When they finally came, my parents claimed he had been shooting at a raccoon. My mom got his medication adjusted, and we moved out for a few months. Today, my dad is stable and a big part of my life. He babysits my child and visits often, but when we moved back, I hid his gun. To this day, no one knows where it is, and I plan to take that secret to my grave. Story 25. In my freshman year of high school, there was a group of bullies who constantly targeted me. I was the nice guy who didn't fit in at the rich parochial school I attended, making me an easy target. One of them, though, was particularly unhinged. One day, he was looking for someone to beat up, and I happened to be there. He went ballistic, slamming my head repeatedly against a locker in the hallway. I eventually blacked out. I woke up in the hospital where I was told I was lucky to be alive. After I passed out, he kept attacking me until 4 teachers had to tackle him to pull him off my limp body. I had blood pouring from my nose, ears, eyes, and mouth. Despite all that, I only ended up with a severe headache and numerous hairline skull fractures, which forced me to quit wrestling. Unbelievably, he was allowed back in school after a short stint in juvenile detention and probation, thanks to his wealthy parents. I struggled with PTSD for years, dreaming of getting revenge. Years later, I found out that he got busted for driving a stolen tractor into a school bus and 2 state trooper cruisers while trying to free his truck from the mud. He was high on amphetamines and had been stealing copper wire. His family's wealth was long gone after his father got caught embezzling and took his own life. Now he's broke and spending the rest of his life in prison, which is more justice than I ever thought I'd see. Story 26. When I was 18, I moved into an off-campus apartment for my first year of college. My parents carefully researched the safest areas and picked one in a low-crime neighborhood. 2 months in, I noticed someone watching me through my bedroom window. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A man holding a knife. I screamed and called 911. The man, realizing I was on the phone with the police, circled my apartment, banging on doors and trying to break in while brandishing the knife. I grabbed a knife of my own and told the 911 operator that if he got in, I'd make sure his DNA was everywhere. It was an odd thought in the moment, but I was determined to fight. The police arrived and the man ran. Despite using tracking dogs, they couldn't catch him. Surveillance footage provided a vague description of his vehicle, but that was it. Unfortunately, he came back, again and again. Once, a neighbor found him sitting on my back porch. He claimed to be my boyfriend and described me and my life in detail. Thankfully, the neighbor had seen a photo of my real boyfriend and realized something was off. He called the cops, but the man fled before they arrived. For 6 weeks, he stalked me, followed me to work, and even followed my sisters home from school. Finally, he left DNA evidence on my back porch that led to his identification and arrest. He took a plea deal and spent 13 years in prison. It turned out he was a self-admitted stalker and voyeur, and I wasn't his first victim, just the first he brought a weapon to. I have no idea how he knew me. I didn't recognize his name or face, but he knew everything about me. I didn't sleep properly for years. Story 27. When I was in 6th grade, attending a Catholic school in Queens, New York, something crazy happened. It was winter, and I was wearing this awful reversible jacket, deep red on one side, dark blue on the other, and made of army-style material. I kept noticing this kid, Freddie, staring at me all day. I didn't know him well, and we weren't friends. He was a bit of a loner and just hung around people I didn't like. At the end of the day, I saw Freddie again. Normally, we went home in opposite directions, but here he was. He walked right up to me, looking furious, almost like he was about to cry. He mumbled, "F your coat," grabbed it with one hand and started fumbling with the other. I had no idea what he was doing, so I pushed him. I thought he had wildly missed a punch and fell, but when he got up, he looked pale and crazed before running away. That's when I saw the feathers. He had slashed my coat with a razor blade. Thankfully, the second layer of the jacket held up, and I wasn't hurt. My dumb 6th grade brain just thought, cool, now I get a new coat. And I walked home kind of happy. When my mom saw what happened, she freaked out and marched me back to school. The police were called, and they found the razor and blood. Apparently, Freddie had cut himself. They asked if we wanted to press charges. My mom wanted him expelled, but I, for some reason, didn't. Things got stranger. Freddie's mom kept changing her story, first saying it was a gang initiation, then claiming he didn't have a warm coat and was jealous. A few days later, the cops came back because Freddie had threatened one of them. It turned out he had serious mental health issues and admitted he wanted to slash my throat because I looked at him weird. It took weeks for it to hit me how close I came to getting seriously hurt. My dad started teaching me situational awareness and kung fu shortly after, but I still feel bad for Freddie. I guess I've always been better at letting things roll off my back than holding grudges. Story 28. When I was 16 or 17, there was a kid at school named Assad. His father was a high-ranking military official from Saudi Arabia, and his family was temporarily in the U.S. for diplomatic reasons. Assad was spoiled, demanding, and slightly unbalanced, with a strong streak of anti-Semitism. We sat next to each other in biology class, and during tests, he would grab my answers without asking and copy them. Tired of it, I made a deal with the teacher. I'd take the midterm early, then intentionally fill my test with wrong answers during class so Assad would copy them. It worked perfectly. Assad copied everything, My gibberish answers, jokes like Catholicism for photosynthesis converts what to sugar, and turned in his test. I got a B. Asad got a 0. He was furious and publicly berated the teacher, who then had to call his parents. Failing the midterm put Assad's entire year at risk, and I thought he'd leave me alone after that. I was wrong. The following summer, I was walking to a friend's house when Asad pulled up on his motor scooter, jumped off, and pressed a knife to my stomach. He told me he was going to gut me and spread my entrails on the sidewalk. The blade wasn't sharp enough to puncture my skin, but it did cut through my shirt. He grabbed me by the neck to keep me from pulling away. I don't know how I stayed calm, but I managed to talk my way out of it by appealing to his anti-Semitic nature. He claimed I had been writing insults about him on desks, but when I pointed out that a Jewish classmate had told him that, something in his logic snapped. He let go, saying he'd kill the Jewish kid first, then come back for me. He sped off on his scooter and I never saw him again. Looking back, I realize how close I came to something much worse. Story 29. This happened to me over 11 years ago when I was 19. A guy I had known for about 2 years, C, invited me over for a party. We had met at an out-of-state college, but were both back in our hometown. We had partied together often, sometimes alone and other times in groups. There was never any romantic or tension between us. We were strictly platonic friends. That night, I had been fighting with my boyfriend and decided to take C up on his invitation since I wasn't working the next day. When I arrived, there were 8 or 9 other people there, all guys and already drinking. C offered to make me a hypnotic drink, which I accepted. I finished the first and was halfway through my second when I had a fleeting thought. I'm the only girl here. That was the last clear thought I had. I was gang raped, drifting in and out of consciousness while being violated repeatedly. At some point, I woke up in a bathtub where C and another man were cutting me with knives. They weren't trying to kill me. They made around 70 deliberate, precise cuts all over my body, avoiding major arteries. I regained consciousness mid-attack, and they panicked. I grabbed one of the knives and managed to stab one of them. He screamed, and then I blacked out again. The next thing I knew, I was in the back seat of my car, parked a few miles from the house. Blood covered me, dried and frozen, and I was wearing nothing but my winter coat. A homeowner saw me sprawled out and thought I was dead, so they called the police. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said I shouldn't have survived. Between the GHB, the cuts, the concussion from being bashed over the head, and the freezing temperatures, I was lucky to be alive. My body temperature was 90 degrees Fahrenheit when I was admitted. Because of the time elapsed, they couldn't stitch my wounds due to the risk of infection. Instead, they used butterfly bandages. I was left with 71 scars, most small, but 6 or 7 inches long. I hid them under long sleeves while healing. When the police questioned me, they made it clear they thought I was to blame for drinking underage. Their attitude was so dismissive that I screamed at them to leave and never followed up. No one was ever charged or questioned. For years, I told no one except my personal doctor, who remained professional despite knowing my family through church. I returned to work less than 24 hours after being discharged against medical advice. Eventually, I broke up with my boyfriend and met the man who is now my husband. It took a long time to feel comfortable in my own skin again, but I'm grateful to be here. My scars tell a story of survival, and I'm proud of the life I've built since. Story 30. When I was 17, I had 2 close calls that could have ended my life. The first happened while I was sitting on a street corner with an older friend, John, who apparently had some bad history with a guy. Something about him sleeping with the guy's wife and robbing his house. A black Cadillac with tinted windows pulled up about 10-15 feet away from us. The window rolled down, and I saw something black stick out. Instinctively, I ducked behind a concrete pillar just as the guy unloaded an entire clip. Somehow, neither John nor I were hit. The bullets didn't even graze us. Lesson learned. Stop trying to shoot gangster style and hold the gun properly if you're trying to be deadly. You almost hit a kid. The second time was after I was mistakenly detained because my car matched the description of a murder suspect's vehicle. I was cleared after a parking ticket proved I wasn't at the scene of the crime, but the victim's family still blamed me. On Thanksgiving, the victim's father and uncle jumped me. I held my own against the father, but the uncle started punching me, and then I saw a flash, a knife. I backed away immediately, but before I could react further, a random Puerto Rican man ran over and put the uncle in a full Nelson, forcing him to drop the knife. That man likely saved my life. Story 31. About 15 years ago, I was walking home late one night in Texas. It was a typical evening, nothing special, until I heard a car speeding up behind me. Instinctively, I hugged the row of parked cars along the road since there were no sidewalks. Moments later, something flew past my face, missing me by less than an inch, and smashed through the window of a car I was leaning on. The car, a slick black SUV, sped away at over 60 miles per hour, running a stop sign and taking a sharp left turn so fast it almost flipped. When I looked at the shattered window, I saw that the projectile was a log, a dense piece of wood, maybe oak, like one you'd use in a fireplace. If it had hit me in the head at that speed, I would have been killed instantly. What messed me up the most was the randomness of it. It wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. It was just mindless, senseless violence. I also realized how insignificant the event was to everyone else. Even my parents responded with mild concern and told me to be careful walking home. Nobody seemed to care that I'd almost died. That night, I learned that everyone's internal world is their own universe, and the outer world rarely aligns with it. For everyone else, my near-death experience was just noise. Story 32. My ex-boyfriend was an extremely abusive person, a behavior he'd learned from his parents. I endured his abuse for a year until he beat me so badly it landed me in the hospital. One night, he told me to choose between having my throat slit or being choked. I couldn't even respond because of the beating I'd already taken, which made him angrier. He started choking me until I managed to bite down on his finger. The pain forced him to stop, and I blacked out from oxygen deprivation. When I came to, the apartment door was open, my phone was gone, and so was he. I half crawled, half stumbled to a friend's apartment down the hall, who called 911 and drove me to the hospital. The damage was severe: contusions on my head, broken wisdom teeth, a fractured jaw, severe hearing loss on my right side, near loss of my right eye, and equilibrium loss that causes me to constantly fall over. The kicker? I almost went to jail for biting him. Despite saving my own life, I was nearly charged. He got off with just 3 years of unsupervised probation, even after admitting in court that he'd wanted to kill me. Later, he violated his probation by stalking me and ended up in a minimum security prison. Luckily for me, karma found him there. Some friends of my dad's were also in that prison, and they made sure he understood the pain he'd caused. Story 33. I was in an abusive relationship where my partner controlled every aspect of my life. He has assaulted me frequently, saying things like, "You aren't allowed to tell me no." He also physically abused me, especially when he was angry, regardless of whether his anger was directed at me. One night, he started berating me because I couldn't guess why he was having a bad day. He had this twisted game where I had to figure it out, and he wouldn't stop tormenting me until I guessed correctly. It was late, and I had work early the next day, so I told him I was done and needed to sleep. I locked myself in the bedroom and texted a friend to see if I could stay with them. A few minutes later, he was outside the door demanding that I sleep with him. I said no. That's when he broke the door down, grabbed my phone, and shoved me onto the couch in the living room. I started screaming. He began choking me, and when I screamed for help, he covered my face with a pillow while continuing to choke me. I blacked out. I don't remember how I got him off me, but I'm certain that if I hadn't, he would have killed me and dumped my body somewhere. I ran to a nearby bar at 1 a.m., and the police came and arrested him. After that, I moved 1,700 miles away. He still insists that I deserved what he did and that I needed to be humiliated. Now he's married with a young daughter. I'm terrified for her future. Story 34. My first husband was an alcoholic, a serial cheater, and eventually a crack addict. I didn't know about the crack addiction at first. I thought his financial troubles were due to the economy. To keep us afloat, I got a second job. After my first day of training, he told me he wasn't happy. I knew immediately he was back with his mistress. Something in me snapped, and I kicked him out. When he realized I was serious, he started showing up at my house. One morning, a few months after our separation, he showed up unannounced. I was half asleep and groggy when I opened the door. He followed me into the bedroom, where he noticed a condom wrapper on the floor from the night before. That set him off. He grabbed my throat and screamed, "You're F somebody?" He let go only to knock me to the ground and drag me by my hair into the bathroom. He pushed me against the wall, pulled back his fist to punch me, and then turned and shattered the bathroom mirror instead. I was screaming for him to stop, but he dragged me through the broken glass back to the bedroom. He threw me onto the bed, pinned me down with his weight, and covered my mouth, telling me to shut up. Then he calmly pinched my nose shut, cutting off all my air. He told me he was going to kill me and bury my body so deep that no one would ever find me. I started to black out. Tears poured from my eyes, and just when I thought it was over, he let go. He told me he loved me and begged me to take him back, promising to go to counseling and fix our marriage. I agreed to everything just to get him to leave. After he left, I called the cops. I had bruises down my arms, a patch of hair missing, and broken blood vessels in my eyes from being strangled. He was arrested later that day. In court, the judge said my victim impact statement was one of the most compelling she had ever read. Still, because he had no prior record, he only got community service, a fine, and probation. A few months later, karma found him. His mistress bashed his head in with a cast iron frying pan, landing him in intensive care. Story 35. A few years ago, when I was around 13, I attended an after-school program in Chicago. One of the kids there had a mental disorder. While I didn't know exactly what it was, he acted oddly, saying whatever came to his mind. The other kids bullied him relentlessly, making cruel jokes about him being Muslim and violent. I didn't particularly like him, but I told the bullies to back off because I knew what it felt like to be their target. This kid, however, had some unsettling tendencies. He talked frequently about violent scenarios without showing any remorse, sometimes asking things like, "Have you ever thought about torturing someone you hate?" I chalked it up to his issues and didn't think much more about it. Fast forward 3 years. I was a high school sophomore waiting for a bus in my neighborhood. It was broad daylight and I didn't think anything of it until this kid walked up to me. He asked if I remembered him. I did, but couldn't recall his name. We made small talk for a while, though I felt uneasy and hoped the bus would come soon. Then he got weird. He asked, "What if I pushed you into the street right now?" and gave me a small shove. I laughed nervously and told him to stop. But moments later, he shoved me hard, and I fell onto the ground, narrowly avoiding falling into traffic. He laughed, not maliciously, but like it was a joke. I got scared and started walking toward my house, but he ran after me. He tackled me from behind, slammed me to the ground, and started choking me. I struggled but couldn't push him off. My chest felt like it was about to cave in, and I began to panic as I got lightheaded. Just when I thought it was over, I heard a clattering sound, and his weight lifted off me. A man in a Jimmy John's shirt had jumped off his bike and tackled him. He yelled for help, and soon other people came to pin the kid down while calling the police. Later, I learned the kid had attacked his mother with a knife earlier that day, thinking he'd killed her. She survived. He had just happened to find me by chance. I couldn't understand why he attacked me, as I'd always been kind to him. I spoke with his mother months later, and she apologized, saying she wished she could have done more to help him. I never blamed her, as I believed there was little she could have done. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I hope he got the help he needed. As for the Jimmy John's guy, I bought him a $150 gift card to thank him for saving my life. Story 36. At the time of this event, I worked as a bouncer and was used to handling physical altercations. I'm 6'5", 225 pounds, and have been on bipolar medication most of my life. One afternoon, I was in my counselor's office for a prescription refill when a woman burst in, wielding a 6-inch buck knife. She pointed the knife at my counselor and said, "I'm gonna kill you, B." I instinctively stepped forward but froze when she turned the knife on me. I grabbed the chair I'd been sitting in to defend myself, but she turned back to lock us in the room. As soon as her hand touched the lock, I lunged across the desk and tackled her. I slammed her into the wall, but she switched the knife to her other hand and stabbed me in the thigh, driving the blade 4 inches deep. I didn't feel the pain due to the adrenaline. I pinned her against a chair and started headbutting her repeatedly until she screamed for me to stop. I told her to drop the knife, and she finally did. I restrained her until the police arrived. When the cops came in, they initially pointed their guns at me, thinking I was the attacker. I had to explain, pointing to the blood pouring from my leg. They quickly realized their mistake, arrested her, and took me to the hospital. She was charged with 2 counts of attempted deliberate homicide, but pled down to assault with a deadly weapon. She got 20 years, 10 for me and 10 for my counselor. To this day, I still see the same counselor. She now has the only office in the building with a lock on the inside, and I insist she locks it during every session. Story 37. About 12 years ago, I was at a friend's house when a girl he invited over showed up with 7 guys who rushed the door as soon as we let her in. I tried to fight back, more out of instinct than anything else, but one of the guys grabbed a lava lamp and bashed me in the head repeatedly. I woke up about 30 minutes later, terrified and confused. I tried to call for help, but my words came out garbled, which only made me panic more. My friend was beaten up too, though not as badly as me. Out of sheer luck, our other roommate came home early because he'd been fired that day. He rushed me to the hospital, where I vomited all over his car. When I arrived, I started having seizures and was flown to a major hospital where I was put into a medically induced coma for 3 days. I woke up surrounded by my family. The first thing I said was, "Damn, I need a cigarette." The girl who set us up panicked and ratted everyone out. The guy who hit me with the lava lamp got 9 years in prison, while the others got 2-3 years each. They had stolen $20 worth of weed. My hospital bills were around $40,000, but restitution covered it. Life can be messed up, but I'm grateful to still be here. Story 38. In December 2014, during finals week, I was living in my college dorms. My roommate had a history of drinking and being a nuisance, but this time, it escalated dangerously. One night I got a call from the police, asking if I could look after him since he was too drunk to function. I agreed reluctantly. When he came in, he vomited in the bathroom for half an hour and then started watching me play a video game. This was out of character for him, but I assumed it was just the alcohol. Suddenly I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he had a pocket knife an inch away from my neck. Instinct took over. I grabbed his wrist, stood up, spun him around, and slammed him into the bed before disarming him. He stumbled and passed out against his fridge. I grabbed my things and ran to the RA, who called the police. He was arrested and charged with assault with a deadly weapon. His base he was later estimated at 0.4, dangerously high. He was suspended for 2 years and placed on deferred adjudication. The experience left me shaken. I couldn't sleep for weeks and even considered transferring schools. It made me think about death in ways I never had before, and even now I sometimes struggle to feel safe.